Today I wanted to talk about the coping mechanisms for imposter syndrome because different people cope with it in different ways, and some of the ways that we cope with it are good, and some of the ways that we cope with it are frankly not so good. And it's not something that we really tend to think about, how do I cope with my imposter syndrome? Because thinking about imposter feelings is uncomfortable, and it's human nature to want to move away from the things that make us feel uncomfortable and make us feel bad and maybe distract ourselves with something else. But you need to understand your coping mechanisms and understand if they're helping you or if they're hurting you. And we've talked about some of the good coping mechanisms for imposter syndrome, but we need to talk about the bad ones. So avoidance, addiction, overworking. Avoidance, going off and doing something else and not thinking about it. So every time that you feel bad and feel that you're a fraud, you shove the feelings down and you go and distract yourself with something else. It's denial, so it's not giving you any sort of resolution, and all the problems stay tied up with you. And that has a negative impact on your self-esteem because, we're not daft, and underneath we know that we don't really feel great about ourselves. The alcohol, other types of addiction or addictive behaviour or distracting behaviour, you don't really have to talk about that being a bad thing. That you see the studies about, I started with half a glass of wine in an evening and then I realised I was drinking the bottle, and it's the way to cope. And it's not necessarily, addiction as in a medical level problem, but it's doing something to stop you thinking about this thing that's making you feel bad rather than dealing with it. And overworking is a really common one. And that's a vicious cycle because you're in this endless pursuit of achievement. And when you achieve, you have a lack of recognition for your own success. So then you get stressed, you get burnt out, you lose your satisfaction in a job, and you have these urges to keep pushing yourself forward. So it's great that you're working and you enjoy your work. It's great that you can distract yourself from imposter syndrome, but you need to understand the methods that you're doing it, and that maybe you could have healthier methods to do it. And maybe you could just go out and deal with the imposter syndrome and start working towards getting through it. One thing I do want to dispel is a myth that this is only women. I get asked a lot, is this only women that get imposter syndrome? And I think this came about because imposter syndrome was first identified in high achieving women, and there seems to be this myth that men don't get it. Certainly, triggers are often different for it. So women have reported being more triggered by peer comparison and by harsh reviews. Men are more generally triggered, mostly by being put in a position of being an expert when maybe they don't want to be, or with people questioning their expertise. So, yes, there are often reported differences. I'm a great believer that individual differences outweigh any sort of category difference, regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. And I don't think that you should have to respond in a certain way. So if you don't respond in the way that you're meant to, that's not a problem. There's nothing strange about that. Just because it's more common to men or to women doesn't mean that that's how you're going to react. What we do also see is that men and women have different coping strategies. Imposter syndrome is more common in women, or it's more commonly reported in women. That doesn't necessarily mean that isn't because women are more aware of it or more comfortable talking about it. And men have just as much of a level of imposter syndrome, but they talk about it less. Men are more likely to do the maladaptive coping, so the avoidance, the alcohol, the overworking, the distraction scenarios. Women tend to rely a lot more on social support and have more active coping mechanisms, so they will seek advice and resources and suggestions from other people. They're also more likely to get emotional support, get people to listen to them and get sympathy, and to use the positive self-talk and things like exercise to relieve the stress and also to recognize their success in other areas. So men have reported more that they dissociate from the imposter feelings. They're not comfortable with feeling like an imposter. They feel that they shouldn't feel like that, so they push it down. This probably leads to the alcohol, the substance abuse, the working harder, and all the avoidant mechanisms. So the coping mechanisms lessen the stress, but they're only temporary relief. And whatever the triggers for your imposter syndrome, whatever your coping mechanisms are for it, if you can address the root cause of the imposter syndrome and actually challenge this, then you have a better chance of getting through it and having it make less of an impact on your life. Take care.